Nick Mew was standing in the river with 13 strangers. 13 drunk, angry strangers. 13 against 1. They yelled and they screamed in order to attract a crowd. They got a crowd. They told lies to make the crowd angry. He's looking for little girls. He's looking for little girls. They layered their lies. They made them louder to make the crowd more angry. He's a predator. He's a predator. They chanted. They pulled on him. They closed the space around him. They got up in his face and they pushed him. Somebody else pushed him. And they pointed and they pushed and they pushed and they pushed. And when he put up his left hand, to block and protect himself as they're in his space, in his face, he puts up his left hand to protect himself. And then they got violent. They got violent. They knocked a grown man, punched him, knocked him into the water. And when he's down in the water, they come up on him and they hit him again when he's down in the water. When he tries to get up out of the water, they attack him from the front, smack him across the front of the face, while somebody else comes from behind and starts pushing him down. In that moment, he feared for his life. And he responded in self-defense. Let me show you what they did. Dante Carlson, who had earlier come over into that group, right? His dad had sent him over to help Nick. But the crowd got Dante going, and it didn't matter. He was going to hit him. And when the opportunity arose, as Dante Carlson will tell you, he laid him out. Knocks a grown man back off of his feet, where it's not just his butt. You'll see on the video, it's his shoulder, it's his head. He goes into the water. He didn't have a measuring stick. He wasn't figuring out what the height of the water is. He went in the water because they hit him into the water. And when he's down, you'll see he's down in the water. And Dante Carlson, who punched him with his right hand, right? He was so confident. He was so confident. Had his beer in his left hand. And then he's given a beat down with his right hand. He then runs around him as Nick is falling into the water. And he's in the water. He runs around him with the beer in his hand because he knows he's got his group around him. And then he comes around and he smacks him again. You can see in the first photo, you can see the shadow of Dante's arm coming across. And you can see it hits him across the face and across the ear. That's not just a slap. That's a full hand. You'll watch the video. It knocks him down. And then when he's down in the water, you'll see A.J. Carlson, who you'll hear tells you that he came over there to mediate. But for whatever reason, maybe it's because of a crowd, maybe it's because of a mob, maybe it's some other mentality, but when this happens, he sees this old man down on the ground. He doesn't go to help him. He goes to push him from behind. And while he's pushing him from behind, look in the upper corner there. That's Dante's arm. You can see in the middle slide, that's Dante's hand smacking Mew across the front of his head. And then you'll see on the third slide, that's where he's extending through. So confident he's going to beat this old man down that he keeps the drink in his hand. That's the close-up where you can see through there Dante Carlson hitting Nick Mew in the face while his friend attacks him from behind. You're going to need to make some choices in this case, right? Make some decisions. Some of the things that maybe that might help you to do. Let me just take a step back, all right? Who is Nick Mew? Who's the man that they wanted to beat down on the river? We're going to tell you about that. How did he get there? What made him be in the river on that day, as we saw here earlier? And we'll tell you that story. And then lastly, why did this angry mob, this pack of players, why did they attack him? And we're going to tell you that. First, who is Nick, right? Nick's 54 years old, lives in Prior Lake. He's married, right? See a photo of, you'll hear from his wife, Sandy, right? She's going to be a witness. She was there with him that day. Him and a bunch of other 50-year-olds went to go have a peaceful day on the river, right? Nick grew up in Romania, right? And when he was about 15 or 16, he immigrated over here. We're not going to get really into it. Romania was not a good place to be in the 80s. Communist dictator, all kinds of other bad stuff was going on. And Nick's dad, like a lot of people in the world, wanted to have a better place for his family to grow up. So they, as political refugees, were accepted by a church in Minnesota, and they came over to Minnesota. When Nick was growing up, his first language was Romanian. Because he lived in this communist dictatorship, he also needed to learn Russian. Because he was in Europe, he also learned to speak French. And because he's this pretty smart guy, he also learned Latin. So when he was 15 and 16, he comes over to the United States, and then he picks up English as his fifth language. He can speak fluent English. He's fine. But I think it's important for you to know that's not his first language. When he graduates from high school in Minnesota, he decides he wants to go on and further his education, and he goes to school in South Dakota. He becomes a mechanical engineer, and he's worked as a mechanical engineer for years and years. Bit of a handyman, as I imagine a lot of engineers are, right? I don't think of myself as a handyman. He's a handyman, good with tools, hangs out with tools, and you'll hear from other people how he's used tools in the past. And you'll hear that as you'll hear on the tape, as he tells the police, living a peaceful, quiet life in Minnesota, never been in trouble before. Him and some of his work friends, as all of us sometimes as adults, our circle of friends tends to be people that we work with. He has a group of friends, Amanda and Ernesto. They've been down the Apple River before. In fact, they've invited him before, and he's been down the river one time before, several years earlier. So they make a plan with all of the group of people that we saw, right? Oh, I forgot one thing here. Nick, like a lot of people, maybe as they get older, isn't of the best health. In 2020, he had a heart attack. And he needed to have quadruple bypass open heart surgery. So these are the photos of him recovering from that. And it took him some time. And he'll tell you how that still makes him feel fragile, right? He doesn't feel as fit as he was when he was 18 or 22. So he decides to get out on the river with his friends. These are some of the friends. And as you'll see in photos, right? He's in the water that day. It's warm that day. Sometimes he's wearing his sunglasses. Sometimes he's not. Sometimes he's got a hat on. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he has his shirt on. Sometimes he doesn't. This is the photo of the start, which is pretty much the exact same thing he was wearing at the end. His friends Amanda and Ernesto asked him to come along. There's a lot of other adults that are coming, right? There's no 20-somethings, no teenagers. They pack food in coolers. Sure, they have a couple of beers, but it's really just a time to get together with their other adults and float peacefully down the river. Nick likes to snorkel, right? So he brought his goggles and his snorkel, right? That's just kind of who Nick is. He's a bit of an explorer, a bit of a curious mind, and he'd brought his goggles and snorkel. And you'll see a video of him prior to this where he's just kind of laying in the water, letting the water rush over him. Well, he kind of floats there with the goggles and the snorkel, and he's looking at the bottom of the water. Probably not a lot of exciting things at the bottom of the water in Apple River, but he was there to see it if there was something there. Before he leaves, he gets a call from his friend Ernesto, because Ernesto knows Nick and knows that Nick's a bit of a handyman, and is like, hey, remember last time we had all those strings? We got all those strings, you got to cut up stuff, you got to do this. Can you bring that little pocket knife that you've got, that utility knife? I've seen you use it at my house. You've used it as a tool. Make sure you bring that, because we need to cut up some of the strings. So he does. Gets back, packs that up, brings it along. And sure enough, when they get there, they have their provided strings, and the people you'll see, they tie up tubes, they tie up coolers, they tie up everything else, and he uses his pocket knife to sometimes cut those up, right? You'll also see as he's going through on the river that day that his shoes kind of fall apart, right? And you'll see that pictures of his shoes, he's got strings, and he's tied them up, and he continues to cut with the little pocket knife that he has to make sure that his shoes, footwear, are something that he can have. So they float down the river. All right, this is the group. You saw that photo already with Mr. Anderson showed that to them, right? And again, here he has the hat on. Here he's got the hat off. You'll see later, not surprisingly, when he goes to snorkel, he doesn't have his sunglasses on. And sometimes when he snorkeled, he had his shirt on. Other times he took it off. Here's another picture of him on the river with the group. Again, has the hat back on, depending upon what the sun is like. So, how did he get there, right? Well, as we talked about, Ariel, his friend, loses his phone, right? And whether they wanted to look for it or didn't want to look for it, I don't know how that's relevant. I don't know how his wanting to go help his friend look for his phone is any way important. You'll get to decide that. But we know at the end of the day it's uncontested. His friend lost his phone. And as you saw in some of those photos, they have these little bags that they put him on, and they didn't know if it was going to float, if it was going to sink. But the water between him and the other two groups was downstream. So if something went into the water, it would float towards where those other two groups were. So Nick used his head and walked where he thought the phone was going to float to, and he goes looking for it, right? And then while he's looking for it, he runs into another group, right? And this is the group that we're going to talk about, two different groups, right? The first group he runs into is this group of high school, right? And you're going to hear that they're drunk. You're going to hear that they were smoking stuff. The one piece of evidence that we know for sure is that at the time of the autopsy, Isaac Schumann's blood alcohol concentration was 0.219. And if you ask his friends are going to say he was the most sober one in the group. So we have this group, they're drunk, they're loud, there's 6 of them, they're football players, they've run as a pack together before. And you're going to hear some videos. They're a quite confident group, right? And they see this man that maybe others are going to judge upon his appearance. This group of 6 see him, and they start making judgments about him based upon what he looks like. He's an old man in the river with goggles, and they don't like it. So they start calling him names. Right? And there's a video, you're going to hear it, because they start harassing him, they start heckling him. They're basically trying to humiliate him. That's what they're doing. And Mr. Cockfield, one of the football players, he grabs his phone out and he thinks it's funny enough that he's going to record it. And you'll see that recording just before this, where he says, "Grown man looking for little girls." And he thinks it's really funny. And then he screams out, "Raper!" He doesn't scream that out for his benefit of his 5 football friends that are with him. He screams it out to draw a crowd, get other people involved. Now, Mr. Mew may or may not have heard that exact thing, but he hears them yelling and he turns around, and what does he see? He's looking for a phone, right? We know that. And when he turns around, he sees somebody holding up a phone. Maybe he's wrong, maybe he's mistaken about why they're holding up the phone, but he sees them holding up a phone, so he turns around to approach them because he thinks that's the phone he's looking for. Been looking for this phone, it floated down this way, these kids are yelling. And he starts jogging towards them. As you saw, as he jogs toward them, he's an unfit 260-pound man trying to move through the water, and he picks up his feet for about 4 steps, and then he reaches his hands out to grab their tubes, and when he does so, he puts the snorkel and the goggles in his mouth. Maybe they thought it was an act of aggression. I don't really think it was. You'll get to see it and watch it. But we know nothing happens after that. Because as soon as he goes and approaches, the goggles and the snorkel drop. He loses them, and he immediately starts looking for them. That's about 5 seconds into the video. He starts looking for them, and they start yelling at him, "Get away, get away, get away." So this is the tubes, right? You as the jury, you're looking downstream this way, right? Nick is standing here in front of the tubes. He looks, he comes up, and then he walks to the other side of their tubes, and he's now on this side of their tubes, downstream from them. He's downstream because that's where he thinks the goggles and the snorkels come. And did he tell the police officer that he thought they knocked the goggles and snorkels out of his hand? Yes, he did. Is that what he believed happened? Yes, it was. Is that what really happened? No, that's not what happened. And the great thing you're going to be able to see in this case is there's a video. There's a video that we can check everybody's testimony against. And you know what? Riley Madison got it wrong. Dante Carlson got it wrong. Madison Cohen got it wrong. Anthony Carlson got it wrong. Pretty much every witness, when you compare their human memory against the video, they got it wrong. Because we're humans. We can't get it as good as the video does. So he got that wrong, but he's still nevertheless looking for his goggles. His goggles are down in the water. He's looking for it, right? He starts walking around there. There's nothing that prevents this group of football players who are screaming at him from just walking around. He's one man, maybe 2 feet wide. And you hear from there, they talk about him walking away, but they can just walk, just float on by and leave this man alone. But they stay to harass, they stay to heckle, they stay to humiliate. Because he starts walking away from them. And if you watch and you count, you watch it enough times, he takes about 10 steps away from them. And it's sometime during those 10 steps, when that group says, "You got 10 seconds. 10 seconds. That's what this group of drunk teenagers says to that old man. And he's walking away at that point. And then what you'll see when the video comes back, he walked away, they followed. They followed. They didn't go around. They went right up to him where he had walked away. Now remember, as he's walking in this direction, his group is 200 and some feet that way, 280 feet that way. This water is deeper. As he starts walking away, he gets into deeper water. He doesn't have his goggles, doesn't have his snorkel, still can't find the phone. He's getting farther away from this group. The drunken teenagers are yelling at him, and now they keep following him. Now, this video, all right, we're going to show some slides from the video. And it's super important, obviously. We're very thankful that we have it so that you will know exactly what happened. But what you got to remember is the video was taken by Juwan Cockfield. It is from Juwan Cockfield's perspective. It's from his point of view, right? It makes it obvious. And so the person that we're watching oftentimes is Nick Mew, right? But you need to know, which is obvious, that the video is not from Nick's perspective. We're not watching it from Nick's perspective, we're watching it from somebody else's perspective. And why is that important? Because the judge is going to tell you, right? It's important because at the end of the case, you'll need to determine the reasonableness of his beliefs from his point of view. You'll need to determine the reasonableness of his beliefs, not actions. You're here to determine his beliefs and the reasonableness from his point of view. So as you're watching that video, you're going to be asked at the end to be like, what would someone in Mew's position, from that standpoint, what would they feel? What would they believe? Let me just quickly read to this, right? If I can, the law of self-defense. In determining reasonableness, a belief may be reasonable even though mistaken. In determining whether Nick Mew's beliefs were reasonable, the standard is what a person of ordinary intelligence and prudence would have believed in Nick's position under the circumstances that existed at the time of the alleged offense. Not 30 seconds before, not a minute before, at the time of the alleged offense. The reasonableness of Nick's beliefs must be determined from the standpoint of Nick Mew at the time of his acts, and not from the viewpoint of the jury now. So I say that to you just so you know when we're looking at the evidence, what you're going to be asked to do at the end. So they get him into this position, and this is 50 seconds into the video. He's walked 10 steps away. They come up to him and approach him and cut him off. So he walks away one time, they follow him. But Nick, right, sees, right, so he's here, he's got a group of people here, and he looks off to his left and he sees a group of adults. There's 2 adults coming this way. Great, adults, not drunk teenagers. Adults are coming this way. He doesn't continue to engage with this. He gets and starts walking over here. He walks over to engage with the adults in the hope, as I think most of us do, when we see perhaps another adult and we're dealing with a group of drunk teenagers, maybe I can appeal to reason. These are adults. And when he walks over this way and the path down the river is wide open, those drunk teenagers follow him. Follow him over here, where he then gets confronted by Madison Cohen. And Madison Cohen is not listening. She's not there for an appeal to reason. Her immediate words are to Nick Mew in his face, go, get the fuck out, go. And you'll see Nick's reaction is kind of like, as you heard from the, look, they have my goggles, like, why are you in my face? What's going on? And you can see, they'll call it a smirk, they'll call it a smile. Look, there's 4,819 frames in that video. 4,819 frames. I have no doubt that you can pause on one of those 4,819 frames and find a photo where somebody's mouth is making a particular shape of anything at any time. Is he smirking? Is he smiling? You watch, you decide. Because he looks perplexed. He's immediately confronted, and he starts to give an explanation, and Dante Carlson tells him, it doesn't matter. Right? Appeal to reason? Nope, we're not doing that. That's kicked out the door. There is no appeal to reason at all. And while this is going on, the Carlson group, right, who sent 2 people over, also has Quentin Carlson, and he's an older adult. Madison Cohen, Dante Carlson, A.J. Martin, they're in their early 20s, which is fine. They're certainly adults, but that might be different than somebody in their 40s. Quentin Carlson, he sees what's going on, and what he says, I was worried about the group against one guy. I was worried that they were going to gang up on him and something bad was going to happen to the old guy. So I told my son Tony and Dante to go make sure they don't attack that old guy. That's not somebody looking at it from Nick's perspective, but that's somebody who can see maybe what Nick sees, hear what Nick hears, and his thought is, oh, something bad's going to happen to that old guy. So he sends over his kids. And when they come over, right, the high school group continues in what I think we now know, it's a new term, is they gaslight him. They just start making up lies in order to affect his perception of reality and everybody else's perception of reality. As soon as that group comes over, that high school group says, he's a predator. And then immediately they're like, he's looking for little girls, he's looking for little girls. There will be zero evidence that there were ever little girls even anywhere near on that river. Zero. There's going to be zero evidence that he was looking for little girls. But they drum up, right? They get this crowd going. They've got the two people here, and they start yelling that. And then the crowd gets to be more, right? As this is going on, it's about 1:13, 1:15 into it, where they start screaming at him. He's looking for little girls. And then you'll see as he's standing here, after he's walked away from that group, he walks over to the adults. He's kind of pointing at them like, I got my snorkel. And they confront him. And as he's standing there, he turns his back on her and them, and he just stands here. And as he's standing with his back turned, and the path down the river is wide open, instead of just walking on by, Madison Cone decides she's going to put her hands on him, and she grabs him and starts pulling him. Pulling him, and you'll see he turns around and immediately looks to his hand and says, don't touch me. Don't put your hands on me. They don't walk away. They stand right there. The crowd, the drunk high schoolers, continue to say he's looking for little girls. Somebody says, is that what he said? And then it changes to the next lie is, we've got it on camera. We've got it on camera. You're going to see that they downloaded that phone. There ain't nothing like that on the camera. There ain't nothing like that on the camera because that's not what happened. Because these drunk teenagers were gaslighting him and they're enticing a crowd. Nick stands there. He's now got people all around him, right? They're chanting at him, he's a predator, he's a predator. He's all alone. It's getting louder. He raises his left hand to his group. Like, we need some help here. Like something's going on, right? And when that happens, you'll see the camera, Jawan Cohen turns the camera to show where he's waving to. So the high school group has knowledge that Nick Mew, who's standing right here, doesn't want to go that way. Nick Mew, who's blocked right here, wants to go that way. Because that's where his group is, because that's where everybody looks. And you'll see on the camera Madison Cohen as she stands and he waves. She turns and looks and sees he's got some friends. So does Madison Cohen say, yeah, why don't you just go that way? She doesn't. What she does is she reaches to her friends and says, hey, get over here. She calls in more numbers. She calls in more numbers to confront him. Because at that point it was 8 against 1 and she wanted more. So she brought over Riley, she brought over Janelle, she brought over Gabby, and then she calls for Anthony, and then she calls for AJ. And then it's those 13 people that surround him, right? And they're standing there, and you're going to see they're all around him. They are relentless in what they're yelling and screaming. From his standpoint, this is like, what is happening? What world did I just step into in which there's this group of drunk kids, drunk teenagers who, they want to say kids, I get it, but you saw those pictures. They're all bigger than Nick. Nick's smaller than he was then, right? But he hasn't grown any. He's just shrunk more, right? He's not a big, fit guy, all right? They're screaming, they're chanting, all right? And at that point, yes, Nick, outnumbered 13-1, reaches in his pocket, finds his pocket knife, opens it up, and stands there with it. He doesn't brandish it, but he doesn't hide it. He's standing there with it. His belief at that point is, I don't want to use this. I don't think showing it to him is going to help. But if something happens, I don't know what's going to happen. So he's standing there with the knife. And as he's standing there with the knife, Riley Madison is right in front of him, and she pushes on him. You'll see that in the video. And then next to her, who's blocking him from his people, is Madison Cohn. She takes her right hand, and she pushes his left shoulder, and he has to go back. She pushes him back. And while all this is going on, the group of drunk teenagers are screaming, chanting, yelling. The numbers are getting bigger. They come over towards him. All right? They push him again. They block his path. And this is the same. That's what it looks like. You're Mew. You're looking upriver to see where your safety is. Behind you is deeper water. You've walked in that direction before. You appealed to reason, and they said, it doesn't matter. They're up in his face, right? And Madison Cohen's pushing and pointing at him, right? And Mew's standing there. He's got the knife in his right hand. He doesn't use the knife. He's standing there while they're pushing and pointing at him, right? And when he does that, all of a sudden, that's when Dante Carlson gets violent, right? He's predisposed for violence, I submit to you. That's the entire purpose of the gaslighting, of getting the crowd there, of yelling with the crowd, of getting it all jacked up, is Jawan Cohen wanted to record a viral video in which some old man was getting beat down, and he was going to get it on tape. He created that world. He put him in that world.
Object, a lot of this is argument, not summarizing.
Sustained. Please focus on what you anticipate the evidence will show.
That's what the evidence is going to show, all right? Dante Carlson has told you before, and he'll say, it doesn't matter, right? At that moment, that's when Nick Mew raises his left hand to protect himself. He's raised it before to call for help. I think I missed it. He raised another time to call for help, a second time, and now they're crowded around him in his face. He raises his hand to protect it, and that's when they get violent, right? It's a push, not a punch. It's a push to protect himself, not a punch. The evidence. You'll watch that video. You might watch it 20 times. It's not on the video. There's no punch on the video. She's standing there yelling, and when she's standing there yelling, there are two people between her and Nick Mew. He's got the knife in his right hand, right? It's not on the video. There's no physical evidence. She says he punches her with his right hand. He's got the knife in his right hand. There's not a mark on her. You're going to see from John Schultz, his video, he spoke with her right then. He's right in her face. He's got a body cam. You'll get to see the body cam of her face, and she, not a blemish on it, not a mark on it. Doesn't support that he punched her. Third thing, multiple evolving stories. Listen to what the witnesses say. Who really says is there a punch, and what position were they in to say it? Because here's what they said before. Quentin Carlson, he told the police, she said he was punched. She said he punched her, but they said it was a slap. So everybody else initially said it was a slap. Gabby, one of the witnesses, says he smacked her with his left hand. She's consistent with he raised his left hand. Mr. Alexander Vang, one of the high school kids, says he hit her with an open hand with his left hand. AJ, he says he saw him pull her hair, which nobody's going to say. That's just wrong. Nobody's going to say anything along those lines. Dante, the person who laid him out after he said that, spoke with the police, and initially what he said to the police is I saw Mew make a swift motion to Riley Madison. Then he says, I saw Mew make a motion towards Riley Madison. Then he says, I saw Mew make a swift motion to Riley Madison. Then he says a fourth time, swift motion, Riley Madison. I don't know what he's going to say when he comes up there now, but what he said before isn't a punch, and it wasn't to Madison Cohen. That's when the violence begins, right? They attracted the crowd, they moved in closer. Now, one of the things you're going to want to ask, and we will ask that, is when this happens, this group of 13 is around and the old man gets knocked and he's down in the ground. Listen to the video. Is there anybody in the group that says, whoa, this is out of hand? No. You'll hear when he gets knocked on the ground, the volume goes up. The cackling and the laughing goes up. And the videographer pushes people away to get in closer to document the beatdown as well as he can. This isn't somebody that's just taking a video on the side. And then again, we move around. Dante Carlson is confident enough to still have the beer in his hand while this happens. Mew's response is in self-defense, right? People come at him, and he makes a quick, short jab motion. He believes he has to use the knife because he's outnumbered. A.J. Martin once. Riley Madison once. Dante Carlson twice, but he only has 2 stitches. Isaac Schumann once. Dante Carlson once. When they come at him, he gives a quick jab. They back up. He doesn't lunge for them. He doesn't follow them. He doesn't recklessly swing it around. They come at him after they gave him a beat down, and he jabs out. When even Brandy Hart, I think you're going to hear from her, right? When Mr. Trofsky asked her questions, when people attacked Mew, he responded. She agrees with that. So, what happens is pretty much all on video, right? At the end, the judge is going to read you that jury instruction similar to what he did about credibility. And how much of credibility is going to play a part in this trial is going to be up to you. You guys are the finders of fact. You decide what happened. But I'd submit to you, it's all on video. Pretty much know what happened because it's on video. All right? So, we can talk about credibility. Nick spoke with the police, right? He told them he was afraid. He told them he feared for his life. He told them he was acting in self-defense. He also told them, I don't really remember anything. And he lied to the police about the knife. He did. He lied about the knife. It was his knife. He brought it. He was outnumbered. He believed he needed to use it. The truth is, he used it because he was surrounded by that angry mob and he was afraid, right? They gave him every reason to be afraid. When their attacks stopped, he walked away. When they stopped, kept coming at him, and every one of them coming at him, right? He responded like a victim of trauma response. You'll hear from witnesses in his group who will say he looked like he was in shock. He was white as a ghost. From his perspective, right? He had just been attacked by an angry mob who was trying to kill him, and he got out of there. So as he walks back, he still has fear, right? It's not something that just goes away. That fear is deep inside of him at that point. And as he walks away, he wants nothing to do with the group that just attacked him. He wants nothing to do with the knife, and he tosses it up onto the shore. Maybe not the best decision, maybe not how he should have responded, but he was suffering from serious shock and trauma at that time. That's what he did. It's not going to be a contested fact. He looks back to his group, right? And they'll say that he's wide-eyed, he's white as a ghost. Remember, he'd just been repeatedly hit in the head, pushed down into the water. His body continued to respond in that way. When he walked away, he knew he'd done some quick jab motions. He didn't know the extent of anyone's injuries. Did he hear them yelling? Sure. They'd been yelling for 2 minutes, screaming and yelling at him. He had been in trauma at that point. He didn't know what the yelling was about. He didn't know that anyone had died. Maybe he should have. Okay, fair enough. But in that situation, would you expect him, who'd just been attacked and responded in just short, quick jab motions, to know the extent of everyone's injuries? They go back and everyone's like waiting. Traffic on the river pretty much shuts down and they wait there. When the police come by and kind of basically move everybody along, his group moves along to the exit. He's got his hat and his sunglasses and his shirt on, just like he did at the start of the trip. Right? He's been in shock. He'll tell you he was cold. So these are the 3 things that you need to think about, right? 1, what happened? Don't think it's going to be a big mystery. It's on video. And I hope that that's helpful to you. Because the facts, I don't think, are going to be very contested. 2, you are going to be asked, what did Nick believe? Right? He told the police, and he'll tell you, he feared for his life. In that moment, against that group who were violent with him and knocked him down, he feared for his life. Right? The video evidence supports this. Right? And I'd ask you rhetorically, what other reason is there? What other reason could there be? They came at him. He was in fear. He responded. The last question. Were his beliefs reasonable? I don't want to belabor the point about the law, right? Can't find it right away. But it's from his viewpoint, right? It's from his standpoint. The belief may be reasonable even though mistaken. In determining whether Nick Mew's beliefs were reasonable, the standard is what a person of ordinary intelligence and prudence would have believed in Nick Mew's position under the circumstances that existed at the time of the alleged offense. So what do we know that might help you to decide that, right? We know he walked away and they followed. We know he tried explaining to them and they said, it doesn't matter. We know they told lies about him to incite the crowd. We know he knows that those were lies, and he was watching as this crowd gets louder and more intense and bigger. We know they cut him off from where he wanted to go back up to his wife and his friends. We know that somebody else that was watching, who is kind of like Nick, a little bit younger, about the same fitness level though. And when that person, Quentin Carlson, sees what's going on, his first thought is, there's something bad that's going to happen to that old guy. We know he was surrounded, we know he was outnumbered, and we know that this environment was ripe for violence. That's the environments they carry. And we know that Nick is fragile. He believed he was fragile. This is somebody who went through open heart surgery within a couple of years. He didn't have fitness. They attacked him, kept attacking him. And they gave him every reason to believe they weren't going to stop. Were his beliefs reasonable? This is Isaac Schumann. I'm sure he was a wonderful man, wonderful human being. We're going to hear a lot about him. But in this moment, on this day, on that river, when he was drunk, he tried to strangle Nick Mew. His hands were on his throat. He was pushing up against Nick Mew. And Nick reaches out as he's falling back. That is what Nick did. His belief at the time, when he's being strangled after being constantly attacked, was he needed to get out of there. And the only way that he could do that was with his knife. He believed his life was in danger. And we submit to you under those circumstances. That's reasonable. At the end of the trial, we're going to come back up here, right? We'll be back up here, and we're going to ask you to return a verdict of not guilty on all counts. The judge will tell you on that last day, he'll tell you the law. If you can reconcile the evidence upon any reasonable hypotheses consistent with Nick's innocence, you must return a verdict of not guilty. Okay, just one more time. The judge will tell you, if you can reconcile the evidence on any reasonable hypotheses consistent with Nick's innocence, you must do so. You must return a verdict of not guilty. Only reasonable hypothesis in this case is he feared for his life. And that belief was not unreasonable. It created that world to get that environment. In that world, he believed it in that moment. And that's reasonable, because anyone in that situation would have believed the same. So at the end, we'll ask you to do your duty